back to the kitchen.
Yeah, back to work with you. But he gave the respect to her desire to learn, and as a matter of fact, he encouraged it. He really encouraged it. And so you look at that and you say, wait, that doesn't sound like that overbearingness that you would have seen in the Old Testament. It sounds like something a little different. Mm-hmm. He specifically was working at teaching her things of great spiritual value. And that's not to be taken lightly.
Not at all.
Folks, if you have a thought, it's 860-442-9956, 442-WXLM. Next one.
Jesus healed women. In Mark 5:25 through 34, now there was a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhage for 12 years.
And we're going to skip a few verses just to get to the point.
On to 27. She had heard about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak. Then we'll jump to 29. Immediately her hemorrhage stopped, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. Immediately aware that power had gone forth from him, Jesus turned about in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" Jumping to 33. But the woman, knowing that what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling, fell down before him and told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease."
Now, again, she really put herself forward with her faith, this woman. Jesus was constantly in a situation of being thronged by the crowds. And it's an interesting account where you've got all these people, and there's probably a lot of jostling and bustling and pushing and shoving going on. And in the middle of all this, he says, "Stop, who touched me?" It's like, wait, what do you mean who touched you? People are crawling all over you practically. But she touched him in faith. And he felt the virtue or the strength go out from him to heal that disease. And this is what he was capable of. But his reaction to that wasn't, "Oh, you naughty woman, how dare you do that?" What was his reaction?
"Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease."
So he gives her that sense of acceptance for her act of faith, which, again, in some cases would have been looked at as really, really outrageous. But Jesus didn't look at it that way. He looked at it as an act of faith that needed an answer, that looked for a reward, and he gave it to her. And he says, "Go in peace. You're healed." And it's a marvelous account where Jesus is showing us that he wasn't treating this woman as something of a lesser individual, and the fact that she had this what's called this issue of blood, this hemorrhaging thing going on. Mm-hmm. I mean, blood was considered something that was unclean, and yet he allowed it, didn't say something about that. He just healed her.
He really had respect for her too. It was even beyond acceptance. It was respect for her faith.
Very much so, very much so. So Jesus healed women. What else?
He spoke to foreign women. In John 4:7 through 10. A Samaritan woman came to draw water, and Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink." The Samaritan woman said to him, "How is it that you, a Jew, ask a drink of me, a woman of Samaria?" Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that is saying to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water."
Now, there is this first of all, this conversation between a man and a woman was not necessarily a very, very common thing. Secondly, this was a woman who was she was a Samaritan. Now, are you familiar with the background of the Samaritans versus the Jews?
I believe they were not thought of very highly by the Jews.
They weren't.
For sure.
They were essentially half-breed Jews.
Right.
And so there was definitely a cultural distinction between Samaritans and Jews, and Samaritans were looked down upon by the Jews. Jesus, A, talks to a female, B, doesn't look down upon her, C, asks her to interact with him by asking her for some water, because she's at the well. And then, D, he says to her, "I have something that if you would ask, I can give you something of incredible spiritual value that you have never seen before." And he, in fact, begins to do this. And she goes away. She goes and tells the people of the town. They come out in throngs to see him, and he spends days with the Samaritans. Mm-hmm. Because of this conversation with this woman who was from a, quote, lesser, unquote, culture. So, again, you look at that, and not only is he treating the Samaritans with respect, and if you recall, everybody is familiar with the parable of the Good Samaritan.
Right.
And you know what maybe I shouldn't say it in public, but well, it cracks me up, a little bit of a divergence here for a second, is we use that phrase in our common everyday language. You know, you have vehicles on the highway, you know, Good Samaritan vehicles, Samaritan. And there's a Good Samaritan law, and it's like, gee, how long is it till they realize that came out of the Bible and they try to take it out of society? I keep wondering, because it's like it's straight out of the scriptures.
You're right.
And it's showing that Jesus is showing that through his experience with this particular woman, that they're people too. They can hear the good news of the gospel, and there will come a point where it will be for them. And it's just an interesting thing that he talked to this, not only the Samaritan, but it was a woman as well. So you can see Jesus really pressing the envelope in terms of treatment of women. Next one.
Jesus treated women as respectfully as he did men. Luke 13:10 through 16. Now he was teaching in one of the synagogues on the Sabbath, and just then there appeared a woman with a spirit that had crippled her for 18 years. When Jesus saw her, he called her over and said, "Woman, you are set free from your ailment." When he laid his hands on her, immediately she stood up straight and began praising God. But the leader of the synagogue, indignant because Jesus had cured on the Sabbath, kept saying to the crowd, "There are 6 days in which work ought to be done. Come on those days and be cured, and not on the Sabbath day." But the Lord answered him and said, "You hypocrites! Does not each of you on the Sabbath untie his ox or his donkey from the manger and lead it away to give it water? And ought not this woman, a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan bound for 18 long years, be set free from this bondage on the Sabbath day?"
And so again, and there's so much in these scriptures, it's hard to just go over them quickly.
We'll talk about each one.
But here, Jesus, again, heals on the Sabbath. The Pharisees are all up in arms about it, and he puts it in perspective for them. But he says something very interesting. Not only does he heal this woman, what does he call her?
He calls her a daughter of Abraham.
And see, that phrase, daughter of Abraham, is not found anywhere else in the Bible. But when you see the idea, when Jesus is dealing with the Pharisees, they would always be claimed to be sons of Abraham.
Right.
Okay? So what Jesus is doing is he's elevating her to a position of great honor by connecting her with Abraham,
the father of the nation.
Right. And in doing so, he is combating the Pharisees' ill-advised attack upon him by putting her into a position of great respect and honor. And this is a woman. So he treated her with incredible respect and gave her probably one of the ultimate compliments that you could give a Jewish woman at that point, calling her a daughter of Abraham. So far, Vic, we've looked at Jesus teaching, healing, speaking to, and respecting women in the New Testament.
This is Christian Questions with Rick and Vicki on WXLM. Grab onto your Bibles. Don't go away. We'll be back in a moment.